thank you. That was terrific. And it's a pleasure to be here. I don't know, I told people in St. Louis I'm going to a farm. I'm going to read the stars around and all that. And I just thought I'd been drinking or something. But anyway, thanks Sarah for having me, and Van, I know you had a hand in all that. Thank you. And it's terrific. So I'm going to read poems. And I'm going to read from this book, this that Will mentioned, Star Map with Action Figures, this chapbook, and the book that came right before it, Wild as the Wind, and just sort of intersperse them. This chapbook came about in a roundabout way. I just wrote a bunch of poems in the summer last year, and they didn't seem like they belonged anywhere else, and chapbook idea came about, and then my partner said, think of it as an EP. Don't let these poems ever be in another book. And it was kind of like their own thing. So, I don't know. I thought, well, that sounds kind of cool. So that's what they are. All right, so I guess I'll read. Man, you were so exact about time. It's impressive. So this is called And If I Fall. Oh, is this a good volume? All right. And If I Fall. There's this cathedral in my head I keep making from cricket song and dying but rogue in spirit still bamboo. Not making. I keep imagining it, as if that were the same thing as making, and as if making might bring it back somehow, the real cathedral. In anger, as in desire, it was everything, that cathedral. As if my body itself, cathedral. I conduct my body with a cathedral's steadiness. I try to. I cathedral. In desire. In anger. Light enters a cathedral the way persuasion fills a body. Light enters a cathedral the way persuasion fills a body. There's a comma in the second one, so it's important. We just discussed commas in workshop yesterday, so someone said, oh, it doesn't really matter. That's all it took. All right, so this is called What I See is the Light Falling All Around Us. Someone was asking me where I get titles, and I more or less lost the ability to get titles anymore, it seems. So I've started taking lines from poems from earlier books of mine, just randomly. And I figure it's not plagiarizing, it's me. And it's, it's interesting. It's all one choir. What I see is the light falling all around us. To have understood some small piece of the world more deeply doesn't have to mean we're not as lost as before. Or so it seems this morning. Random bees stirring among the dogwood blossoms, a few here and there stirring differently somehow, more like resisting stillness. Should it come to winnowing my addictions, I'd hold on hardest, I'm pretty sure, to mystery. Though just yesterday, a perfect stranger was so insistent that I looked familiar, it seemed easier in the end to agree we must know each other. To his body, a muscularity, both at odds and at one with how fragile everything else about him, I thought, would be if I could see inside. What's the word for the kind of loneliness that can feel like swimming unassisted in a foreign language for the very first time? I don't know, so that's why it ends there. And I am aware that in this next poem there's a cathedral, as if you hadn't had enough in the first poem. I live next door to a cathedral, so it sometimes creeps up. It's called Wake Up. The road down from everything even you had hardly dared to hope for has its lonely stretches, yes, but it's hard to feel alone entirely. There's a river that runs beside it the whole way down, and there's an oversong that keeps the river company. I'm leaves, you're the wind. I used to think the song had to do with the leaves' confusion, the wind letting up. They're mistaking this for something like courtesy on the wind's part, or even forgiveness. But leaves don't get confused. Silly to think it. And what can leaves know of courtesy, let alone forgiveness? What's forgiveness? Wake up, for the falconer has lost his falcon. He has heard that falcons are like memory, they come back. But not all memories do. Not all memories should. If anyone knows this, it's the falconer. How long ago that was. Yet, all the varieties of good fortune he's come upon, as a hand comes idly upon an orchard's windfalls. How different he's become since. None of it matters when the falconer steps back into memory, as into a vast cathedral, which is to say, when he remembers. How cool it is inside the cathedral. And at first, how dark. Soon, though, he can see a chapel set aside for prayers specifically to the Virgin whose story he's always resisted. He sees a corner where people have lit candles, sometimes for another's suffering, sometimes for their own. He sees the altar, the falcon sitting on top of it. The weight of grief over what's lost versus the shadow of what's lost, forever struggling to return and failing. Who can say which is better? The falconer's eye meets the falcon's eye. I have a story, the falcon says, seems to, the wings lifting, the feathers rippling with the story's parts. I have a story. I can't wait to tell you. All right, this poem is called Soundtrack for a Frame of Winter. One of the things that I noticed about these poems, and maybe why I put them all together in this chapbook, is because they do actually seem to be more in the vein of storytelling as opposed to meditative. Anyway, this is an example of that. Soundtrack for a Frame of Winter. There's a forest that stands at the exact center of sorrow. Regrets find no shelter there. The trees, when they sway, sway like the manes of horses when a storm's not far. There's no reason to stay there, nothing worth going to see. But if you want to, you can pass through the forest in the better part of a long day. Who would want to, though? To have entered the forest changes nothing about sorrow. It's a forest, not oblivion, not erasure. Some have entered it in the name of distraction, if only briefly, from the sorrow within which the forest thrives to no apparent purpose. Fools, dreamers, the desperate from whom it's best, if at all possible, to look calmly away. The trees of the forest at the center of sorrow, the exact center, all but say. Or that's what it sounds like on windier nights. Tonight, for example. At the forest's exact center, almost impossible to find, but I've been there myself. There's a makeshift grave, more than likely overgrown by now, with weeds, moss, the usual. With defeat, desire, the usual. Wingless ambition, frangible hope, misunderstanding, i.e., mistake, another form of weakness, i.e., the usual. That the forest itself contains no apology doesn't mean you're not hurt, or I'm not sorry. I didn't hurt you. Alrighty. I don't say a lot between poems because I don't know what to say. So that was probably too much patter right there as you're going to get. We'll read this poem called Gold Leaf. It's all, in a review, someone said it's all one sentence. But that wasn't right. It's all one fragment. And a reviewer who doesn't know what a sentence is shouldn't be writing reviews. So, likewise with the comma, you see these things matter. All right. I mean, I still appreciate that people want to write a review, but, you know, get it straight. So, okay, it's called Gold Leaf. To lift without ever asking what animal exactly it once belonged to, the socketed helmet that what's left of the skull equals up to your face. To hold it there, mask-like, to look through it, until looking through means looking back through the skull, into the self that is partly the animal you've always wanted to be, that, depending, fear has prevented or rescued you from becoming, to know utterly what you'll never be, to understand in doing so what you are, and say no to it, not to who you are, to say no to despair. Just not a bad thing these days to try to say no to. Despair. See, it's really a series of infinitives. See? See? Yeah, this poem's called My Monster. My monster. This hill, even if a small one, this hill with us and the dog, the same dog, forever moving shadow-like down it, where the hill disappears. For some of a winter long ago, back when empathy still seemed a form of love, more static maybe, less steep, but just as complicated, I stayed in a small house, cabin-like, but no cabin, at the end of a pier that jutted out into a harbor, the way piers do. It was January. Why so this quiet? He used to ask, in his language. I barely knew his language. I'd turn him over, and there was sex or not then, and there was sleeping after. At night, as I lay in bed, the whole place would rock, mostly gently, which was the tide finding the higher shore again, or sometimes the wind making rough with water, as was the case one particular night when it was snowing over the sea, and windy. I know resemblance is not equation. I know equivalence doesn't mean translation. I say there was a wind, and that's often how I remember it. But tonight, it almost seems the night must have been windless. I remember the steady verticality with which the snow fell, falling into the sea. I'd turn him over. I barely knew him. Why so this quiet? The crown looks good on you. The veil does too. When you lift the veil, the future's everything you wished for. I know you're thinking, where the hell did that veil come from? I thought at the moment I wrote it, and I thought, fuck. And I thought, I'm keeping it. So, there it is. Fine. Monomoy is the name of what used to be a peninsula off of Cape Cod. I think it may be an island now after a hurricane happened many years ago. But anyway, that's the name of the poem, Monomoy. Somewhere, people must still do things like fetch water from wells in buckets, then pour it out for those animals that, long domesticated, would likely perish before figuring out how to get for themselves. That dog, for example, whose refusal to leave my side I mistook as a child for loyalty, when all along it was just blind. What is it about vulnerability that can make the hand draw back sometimes, and can sometimes seem the catalyst for rendering the hand into sheer force, destructive? Don't you see how you've burnt almost all of it, all the tenderness, away? Someone screams to someone else in public. And looking elsewhere, we walk quickly past, as if even to have heard that much might have put us at risk of whatever fate questions like that spring from. Like sacrifice, begins as a word at first. Soon it's the stuff of drama. Cue the follow-up tears that attend drama. Then it's pretty much the difference between waking up to a storm and waking up inside one. Who can say how she got there? In the ocean, I mean. But I once watched a horse make her way back to land mid-hurricane, having ridden surfer-like the very waves that at any moment could have overwhelmed her in their crash to shore. She shook herself, looked back once on the water's restlessness. History's always restless. And the horse stepped free. I should say, that line about, you're going to say that was the best line. The one about, don't you see how you burnt almost all of it? That's a line from Iris Murdoch's novel, The Sea, The Sea. Is that what it's called? Yeah, The Sea, The Sea, yes. Fine, and I believe there are 2 poems left. Yep, 2 poems left. Exactly the right amount of time, I think. Wild as the Wind is this one we're going to read first, which I know is the name of a song. As people say, do you know? Yes, I know. For me, it's the name of a song sung by Nina Simone. When people say, do you know the David Bowie one? Yes. And do you know the Cat Power one? Yep. And the Johnny Mathis one? Yep. So, there are probably others, but those are the 4 I know. Wild as the Wind. About what's past, hold on when you can, I used to say. And when you can't, let go. As if memory were one of those mechanical bulls, easily dismountable, should the ride turn rough. I lived in those days at the forest's edge. Metaphorically, so it can sometimes seem now, though the forest was real, as my life beside it was. I spent much of my time listening to the sounds of random, unknowable things dropping or being dropped from, variously, a middling height or a great one, until, by winter, it was just the snow falling, each time like a new, unnecessary taxonomy or syntax for how to parse what's plain. Snow, from which the occasional lost hunter would emerge every few or so seasons, and, just once, a runaway child, whom I gave some money to and told no one about, having promised. You must keep what you've promised very close to your heart. That way you'll never forget, is what I've always been told. I've been told quite a lot of things. They hover, some more unbidden than others, in that part of the mind where mistakes and torn wishes echo, as in a room that's been newly cathedraled, so that the echo surprises, though lately it's less the echo itself that can still most surprise me about memory. It's more the time it takes, going away. A mouth opening to say, I love sex with you too, it doesn't mean I want to stop my life for it, for example. Or just a voice, mouthless, asking, since when does the indifference of the body's stance when we're alone, unwatched, in late light, amount to cruelty? For the metaphysical poets, the problem with weeping for what's been lost is that tears wash out memory, and by extension, what we'd hoped to remember. If I refuse increasingly to explain, isn't explanation at the end of the day what the sturdier truths most resist? It's been my experience that tears are useless against all the rest of it that, if I could, I'd forget. That I keep wanting to stay should count at least for something. I'm not done with you yet. I do feel the need to say, because someone asked me after I read it one time, I did not give money to a runaway child who came out of the woods and not report it. I'm like, wow, that's cold and poetic. But it's illegal, I think, to do that. You know, it's poetry. It's poetry. So, all right, I'll finish with this poem called All the Love You've Got. Which I just feel like, I feel a certain pride in saying was banned from Poem a Day at the Academy. Yeah, it's a tedious story, but I was happy. I had just turned 60 and I thought, I can still be banned. I'm still there somehow. All the love you've got. And now, having dismissed everyone as he wishes he could dismiss his own dreams that make each night restless, that same unswayable knowledge and the belief in it that he is king here, which means being a stranger, at least outwardly, to even the least trace of doubt. After all of this, the king has stepped from the royal tent, is walking toward the sound of water, where the river must be. There's the river, rivering south, as rivers tend to. Beside the river, two men are fucking. Young men, almost too young to even know about fucking, thinks the king, who can't help noticing how the men bring a somehow grace to the business between them, a grace that some might confuse with love. But the king rarely makes mistakes, which is to say, he knows mercy when he sees it. What does mercy have to do with fucking? What does love have to do with grace? What are dreams but the only rivers memory knows how to make? There's a kind of music to how the men routinely but unpredictably trade places, entering and withdrawing from each other. It's as if they're singing a song that might go, I'm the king. No, you're the king and I'm the river. No, you're the river. On and on, like that. Leave them. They do no harm. The king making his slow, insomniaed way back. The night dark, but not dark entirely. Moonless, yes, but through the pines, enough stars still visible. Whoever goes there, let me pass. Beneath the brocaded cloak, each bead stitched to it by hand, beneath the cloak of some more breathable, lighter fabric beneath that, the king's cock rests like tenderness itself against the king's left thigh. How soft the stars look. Thank you.